again. So you see, Jesus used the word that could mean again, or could mean from the beginning, or could mean from heaven, or from above, or anew. And Nicodemus took it to be that Jesus was saying, unless a man is born again. Now, was Nicodemus right?
Under normal circumstances.
Under normal circumstances, yes. Explain that.
Well, God could do anything he wanted, but he wanted somebody to be born. That's God didn't.
Okay. All right. Nicodemus. Somebody else want to comment?
He's looking at today from this realm, not.
Okay. All right.
It doesn't appear to me that Jesus is contradicting him when he follows what Nicodemus said, but rather trying to illuminate what he meant a little further.
Okay, good point. Good thought. Yes, sir.
I think sometimes we do an injustice to Nicodemus and we make him seem an ignorant person or a fool. He was one of the Sanhedrin. He was intelligent. He knew what was going on. And it's very likely that he was just following the same rabbinical type of questioning that they would have used. He understood Jesus wasn't really saying, he didn't really believe that he meant be born again physically, but he asked the question that way in order to get a more illuminated response from him.
Nicodemus, keep in mind now, this is not a lightweight we're dealing with here. Nicodemus was a man who was highly intellectual. Nicodemus was a man who was a spiritual leader. Nicodemus was a man who was recognized by his peers and by his community as being a leader. And Nicodemus was probably familiar with the idea of rebirth for proselytes to Judaism for the Gentiles, but not with the idea that a Jew had to be reborn. So he probably had heard about the new birth, about when a Gentile would become a proselyte. He had to go through baptism or a ceremonial washing. He was probably familiar with that, but he probably never heard anything about a Jew being born again of water. One writer I wrote down said that this was a misapprehension on the part of Nicodemus. Another one says, and I quote, "But this stupid misunderstanding of the meaning of Jesus is precisely what John represents Nicodemus as making." And so that's a little bit harsh. I know I used a word there I'm not supposed to use. I apologize for that. It is a second birth that Jesus is speaking of here, a regeneration, but it is no doubt a birth from above by the Spirit. And Jesus said, unless one accepts this and follows through with this, he cannot see the kingdom of God. And then the next verse says what? Read verse 4 again. Anybody?
How can a man be born when he is old? Nicodemus asked. Surely he cannot enter a second time into his mother's womb to be born.
Okay, being old. How do we know how old Nicodemus was? No, but Nicodemus was certainly applying this to himself. We don't know his age. Again, one writer said he surely was too old to be the young ruler of Luke 18, verse 18. And Nicodemus, his statement emphasized by the second question, expecting probably a negative answer. But then Jesus says in verse 5, let's go to the answer. Someone read verse 5.
Jesus answered, "Most assuredly I say to you, unless one is born of water and the Spirit, he cannot enter the kingdom of God."
All right. Jesus answers by saying, ek, udatos, kai pneumato. Literally, out of water and spirit. Unless one comes out of water and spirit, he cannot see the kingdom of God. Jesus is talking about a spiritual birth. And he is saying that this spiritual birth is essential to being a part of the kingdom of God. Up to this point, only Jewish people had become members of a kingdom, but it was no doubt a political kingdom. There was the Pharisaic hope of, let me rephrase it, the Pharisaic hope was that it would be a political kingdom, and it would make all the world follow the King, Jesus, the Messiah. But Jesus adds ekoudato. Ekoudato. It literally means out of, coming up out of the water. Ek is the Greek out of. Jesus said, you must come up out of the water. And A.T. Robertson says, in the best manuscript, he also puts ek to pneumato. You must also come up out of the Spirit. So out of the water and out of the Spirit. Now there are a lot of theories about this. Let's talk about it. What could Jesus be talking about when he says water and Spirit? What are some of the possibilities? Baptism. Okay. What's another possibility? Yes, sir.
Well, the way I look at it is a natural physical birth involves fluids in a womb. And you have to have a male and a female to be able to reproduce. So I see this as the water representing the female side, the feminine side, and the Spirit representing the masculine side of the Lord. And that's where that new birth comes into play. So it's similar to a physical birth in a sense.
Okay. So you're saying that Jesus was comparing the spiritual birth to the physical birth and used terms that were recognized terms when it refers to the physical birth. Okay? What else? Any other ideas?
Behind you.
Yes, sir.
Nicodemus was no lightweight, but neither was Jesus. I mean, we know that, but I think Nicodemus recognized that as well. I think what he was doing was prodding him for deeper meanings that, without saying it for him, he wanted to save himself. And in this particular case, I believe he was saying that born of water and Spirit is both of the births that he's talking about. That he's referring to physical birth as being born of water and a spiritual birth being born from the Spirit or out of the Spirit or whatever. And I assume that it could be baptism. I'm not saying Jesus was such a good teacher, he could make it both ways. In my opinion,
so you're saying there's a possibility that he's talking about two different births here? Is that?
Well, he says a man can't exist without being born. So a man, to enter the kingdom of heaven, must be born two ways. One of water and then of Spirit. All men are born of water, if you take it that way. And those that enter the kingdom of heaven will be those that are not only born of water, but then born of Spirit.
Okay. All right. So there's another possibility. Yes, sir.
We have a historical base to help us understand this. All the writings immediately after this New Testament, universally, all our ante-Nicene church fathers understood this as baptism.
All right.
And that's a lot of weight.
All right. The church fathers clearly understood this to be talking about baptism. There are names like Irenaeus and Tertullian and Justin Martyr and Cyprian, and all of them, those church fathers, refer to, say this refers to baptism. There is a monumental work written by a fellow named William Wall, a leading scholar in the Church of England, and he said that there is not a single writer of antiquity who denied the identification of the water of John 3:5 with baptism. He suggested that the first one to disassociate these two items was John Calvin, and that Calvin even conceded that his interpretation was brand new. All right, so there's a little bit of church history. Anybody else have any possibilities here? Anybody else?
I think Peter did.
All right. All right.